We're going to move into the last lecture that is on quality control. Belief that I have is that in order for you to be able to supervise your assistant, even though your assistant may be cutting and placing grafts, you have to know what the good quality is and what the proper motion is in order for you to provide a quality control. So I don't have anything to disclose. The quality is, this is the definition, consists of setting specific standards relevant to obtaining desirable results, monitoring their implementation, in identifying as well as providing guidelines for correcting one's mistakes. It is a continual process of comparing one's work against standards. The objectives for quality control is to obtain maximal yield from harvested hair. Then you also, another objective is to have maximal hair and graft survival, maximum regrowth, and natural and seamless result. Human factor in hair transplantation are all, there is no mechanical, unless you're doing FU, but even then it's right, it's a human factor that can cause damage to the tissue. So there are two things we are looking at in considering human factors that can create common mistakes. One is trauma to the tissue. It could be either leaving it to dry out or physical damage. And the other is improper technique that can be based on lack of dexterity, attention, or knowledge. Who, when, and what assistants and physicians should do the quality control: when during the tissue slivering, graft dissection, placement, and at the end of the procedure. And you should look at your own work and the work of your assistants. You're looking for two things. You're looking for whether the quality is attained or whether it could be obtained. So either it's obtained or it could be attained. So you're always, if you walk through the room and you monitor your assistants, you're looking whether they're already reaching the quality you expect or whether something can be improved. Look for, in slivering, you're looking whether there's a transection, yes or no, and what to do about it, which side, and I'll show you in a slide. You're going to look for the thickness of the sliver, whether there's a thin or thick sliver. Usually we want thin slivers because they can expose follicular units better and facilitate dissection. We can accept thick slivers only for making DFUs. And we also look for desiccation, whether there are hydrating tissue, and so once again that whether the slivers are shiny or not, and we encourage assistants to spray them every 2 to 3 minutes. In graft dissection, we are looking at whether there's a transection, visible or not, and also we are looking at the wasted tissue. So for example, if I have two assistants, they are dissecting the same amount of tissue. If I give, let's say, 2 centimeters dissected into slivers, and so 2 assistants have exactly the same number of slivers. If one is producing 2 times the grafts of the other one, that is indication to me that one who has fewer grafts is transecting more and has more waste. So either that or maybe that piece of a tissue was thinner, had sparser. But if there's no discrepancy in hair density, if there's a significant discrepancy in hair yield per assistant, I will go and examine the waste to see whether that assistant is transecting too much during the graft dissection. I also look for size and shape of the grafts, whether they are trimmed properly, whether there's a consistency in size. Your incisions are made with the same needle or blade. You allocated a certain size recipient site for 2 hair grafts. Majority of my 2 hair grafts should be the same size in order to fit snug or appropriately into your site. So has to be a match between assistant and physician's work. And we also look for whether the grafts are dry out or not. And finally, when we are placing grafts, we are looking for the way the graft is grafts, whether there is a proper handling. We also look at manipulation, how many motions assistants do, then whether they're pushing, forcing in it, or sliding in. I always say that 2 motions So I slide to either the entire graft into my site in one motion, or I slide 2/3 into the site, release, and just readjust second time. Rarely do I have to go 4 times to adjust my graft. If someone is doing more than 4 adjustments, I pull the person aside and examine what is happening. Either they're not aligning with the angle, there has to be a problem, because there should not be more than 4 motions while placing one graft. Hair curl, I will also show you what I'm looking for, whether the hair curl is oriented properly. My explanation is that if this is the scalp, hair curl has to show, so it's not just the angle of your graft, but the hair curl has to point toward the scalp. Even if you angle your sides and the assistant turns the curl up, it will look higher, even though your site was lower. The hair pointing up will appear as if your site was created higher. And correct location, appropriate here for the location. So what I mean by this is, if you're going to see the images of incorrect location, but if the hair, let's say a 2 hair graft is placed in, instead of 1 hair graft, or 1 hair and a telogen, assistant believes that this is a dormant hair, it's not a big deal. If 2 hair grafts grow in the very front row, they look pluggy and unnatural. So it is not just you created good sites, you have to be aware what is placed in those sites. And then we're looking at the proper depth and whether the field is clean all the time. So those are the things we look for. In transection, when I examine slivers, there are 2 ways to look at what happens. If I look at this transection, so I consider this the end of the sliver, the sides, this transection happened during the harvesting. If I see these transections on this side, it happened during slivering. So this is the assistant that transects during slivering. I also explained that if you transect, you always damage 2 slivers, 2 sides with 1 transection. So during the slivering, if one goes wrong, the other one will go wrong. So there's a damage on 2 sides, and this is why we showed this image, to know what not to do. Also looking at what moist versus dry graft looks like, what good graft versus bad graft looks like. Transection, I usually encourage not to have any transection. And so this will be totally discarded. I would encourage this to be trimmed, this one to be trimmed out too, this to be trimmed. If, let's say, this graft is placed instead of 1 hair graft, considering that there's one viable and the other one is transected, so maybe won't grow. If it does grow in a first row instead of 1 hair graft, it will look pluggy and it's not acceptable. I also look for the way the graft is grasped. So we are looking at where the positioning of the forceps on the right upper image. You're looking, it's holding by the hair. It's difficult to see on a screen that is far like this, but I'm holding the tip of my forceps, holding the fat below the bulb, and this is holding the fat beside the bulb. Hopefully on your screen, when you download this presentation, you will be able to see this. And then I'm showing on this side what is incorrect. The right angle is not, there's a 45-degree angle is better. And also this forceps is holding on the bulb, which will damage the bulb. And this one is holding halfway to the shaft. And if in case that someone is holding a graft high on a shaft, the graft may bend and